name's Pamela Rennie. I'm Senior Policy Officer and Chief Executive Service. I've been taking the lead on the welfare reform programme, looking at reviewing our advice services, and obviously that was the pilot project that we undertook for the Equality and Human Rights Impact Assessment. The impact assessment on the review of advice services certainly did identify potential impacts for equalities and human rights, and our impact assessment team then went on to identify, I suppose you could call them recommendations for action so that we could mitigate those potential or actual impacts. We identified kind of 4 key areas. So the first area was round about how we commission our advice services so that equalities and human rights are in our service specification with organisations. Secondly, for training, so that all our advice staff are trained in equality and human rights, adult protection, so that they're given a fair and sensitive service. How we share information, just to make sure that clients get an efficient advice service, that they're kind of getting a fair hearing in a reasonable time frame, and that we just make that an efficient service for them. And lastly, about ease of access to our advice services, so that our locations for delivering advice are in the right places. We're considering accessibility issues, that we don't have any language barriers to accessing service, and that we're delivering advice across all the channels that might be appropriate, so whether that's face-to-face, web, telephone or home visits. We've already implemented some of our recommendations. Our commissioning for advice services from July this year will look at an enhanced role for equalities and human rights within our service specification. And secondly, in our redesign of the customer service centre downstairs, we'll be looking at privacy issues, because that came up quite a lot within our impact assessment. I think applying the results of impact assessment is important. I mean, especially for advice services. Advice services are about making sure that people are aware of their rights and responsibilities. Ultimately, it's about raising the quality of life for vulnerable people, for groups and communities. So the equality and human rights kind of ethos sits well with the advice services ethos. Our impact assessment day brought together a range of services with a different set of perspectives. So we brought together our frontline officers, so it was about our advice services, our social work services, but we also brought together a lot of our policy people, so people who had experience of equalities and human rights, impact assessments, the policy behind it. So we had legal services, chief executive service, again policy staff from social work. So there was quite a range of people. The impact assessment day, although we had some awareness training for equalities and human rights, applying that knowledge was difficult in terms of advice services, so it was good to be able to bring together a range of perspectives so that you could tease out what those impacts might be and what you might be able to do for it. Reflections would be that you embed equality and human rights impact assessments in your project work, so whether that's about a service or a policy, you take it alongside developing that service or policy, so that when you have some recommendations, the actions are there to be taken forward. I think round about the human rights perspective, it was new, and it was certainly new for a lot of us in our pilot assessment. It wasn't scary though. Once you broke it down to what the actual duties were and what the right actually meant, you could apply it. So it's just about taking the time to understand it and then apply it to the service area that you're looking at.